Good evening. I wasn't expecting this to be quite as popular as it seems to be. We're currently sitting at 101, 102 now people signed in and watching, which hopefully you'll think the next hour is worth listening to. So my name's Barry Elkington. I'm an M65 from Octavian Drubers. Done lots of planning in the past and controlling. Recent years have seen some changes to the rules and ideas on best practice. So we've got 60 minutes, of which we've used 5 so far. Please put any questions into the chat. One thing I'm not going to cover here is anything to do with that's specific to the major events, which we covered in the first of the major events webinars. So this is more general and applies to events across the board. So I'm going to start by going back to basics and the color-coded courses. This, as far as I know, has been the course lengths for as long as I can remember, probably 30 years or more. One thing to remember is that the lengths shown in that table are intended only as a guide and do not allow for any height climb. So this is keeping it simple for newcomers to be planners, newcomers to events. When you get to major events, you start to get into course length ratios and expected winning times. For local and regional events, it's estimated winning times are fairly pointless, as you haven't got the top runners there. Quite often people run out of what you would call out of class because they want to use it for training or just want to run a bit further. So it's more about getting the technical difficulty and the length about right. And using a simple table. So if the area is simple, navigating simple, and it's technically not that difficult, physically not that difficult, then you go to the top end of the range. If it's a technically difficult area or physical, then you err to the bottom end. And what you should find is that your courses almost certainly will fit at a similar position within each of those ranges for each length. If you suddenly find yourself with a 3.5K green course and a 7.5K blue course, you've probably got something wrong. So look for consistency of increase between the different course colours. A bit of promoting of the colour-coded planning articles on the British Orienteering website. They cover how to plan and some good ideas about how to plan the different colour-coded courses. And interestingly, that's hardly changed in the 30 years that I've been orienteering. The courses that are missing from that table, there are some, and I'll cover those in the next few slides. But the whole idea of the basic color-coded system is that it is simple to understand and simple for planners to plan courses that meet the guidelines. So I'm going to look at 3 specific courses where there have been a few slight changes. The first one is the white course. For years it said when you're planning a white course, the flag and the punches as a control should be sighted in the direction of the next control, which sounds great and obviously makes life very easy for anybody doing the course. Unfortunately, there are events where you might want more than one white course, or you might have a white and a yellow course and you want them to go in different directions when you get to a junction. So I like to slightly modify that and say at simple junctions, you can put a banner in a neutral position. So actually it requires the junior to look at the map and figure out whether to turn left or right. An example of a good place to do that would be control 2 on that map, where it's an obvious T-junction. The competitor gets to the main track and is given a simple choice. Do I turn left? Do I turn right? The control shouldn't really point them into either direction, especially if you've got a course going left at that point as well as going right. However, if you look at control 3, where you've got probably 4 or 5 different paths all coming together, in that case you probably do need to put the banner on the path that the competitor needs to take. What you shouldn't do under any circumstances is put the banner in a position that suggests to the competitor that they follow the wrong path or go the wrong way. And I remember this from an event many, many years ago where a planner had very nicely hung a control on a gate because he thought it provided a bit of interest for the juniors competing. And one junior thought, the control's hanging on the gate. I must be required to go through there. So promptly opened the gate and ran across the next field, which wasn't on the map at all. So you do need to think about things like that. So whatever you do, don't tempt competitors to go the wrong way when you're setting white and yellow courses. No questions yet then, Joe? Good. Right, the next one. A long time ago, there was a red course. It got renamed to Long Orange. Now, at the request of the coaching advisory group, it's gone back to being red. And this is really aimed at getting athletic adult novices into the sport. Typically park runners who can only cope with yellow-orange standard technically. But if you suggest to them that they run an orange course of 3K, once they've done the park run, would probably say no. Red for runners sounds a much better marketing slogan than Long Orange, which has historically been thought of as mainly for youngsters. So it is quite a good marketing tool to use red for runners, accepting that not all areas will support a red course. But quite a few of the country parks will, which is generally where you find runners. And also it means you don't have to drag the athletes too far away, probably from where they live. I wouldn't expect to find a red course on some remote area of a Welsh hillside. I think it would just be impossible to set something which followed trails for that sort of distance. The other courses that weren't on the original slide, which have appeared probably over the last 10 or 15 years, are due to the aging demographic of orienteers. A green course, 3.5 to 5K, is actually quite long for somebody in their late 70s or 80s. So we've gradually got to short green and now very short green, and we're seeing competitors still going, there's quite a few MW85s and even the odd MW90 running. But physically, they are not capable of doing what they could 30 years before then. So when you're planning those courses, please try and think about how somebody that isn't quite as agile as you are will cope. And it's perhaps not such obvious things. Climbing over a wall or a fence is probably quite easy when you're younger. For older people, it can be quite difficult. And the other example I've used from the map there is that's from Bentley Wood. 2 to 3 through White Forest looks all right. The stream, which is a small river which goes through there, the valley on either side is so steep that actually for older people, it's actually almost dangerous. And you could find people getting to the bottom and not being able to climb up the mud on the other side. So think about things like that when you're planning. And also don't put controls in deep depressions, pits or gullies. They are hard to get into and sometimes impossible to get out of without assistance. So hopefully that's covered the color-coded courses. And I say, if you've got any doubts about planning or you're introducing new planners to the sport, then get them to read those guidelines on the BOF website. So I'm now going to move on to something which raised a few discussion points. And this is about the start and how you set the start up. From the rules, the position of the start line should be competitors waiting to start can't see any route choice options taken by competitors. That basically says what you don't want is people standing around just outside the start box trying to figure out where they're going to. So you either have a start where people all follow the same route for the first few hundred yards until they're out of sight, or you have a taped route. The issue with a taped route is how do you make sure that if your start flag is 200 meters away, that the competitors actually go to the start flag? And this has caused a few interesting discussion points where, in theory, you should actually follow a marked route. The new signed on the map for a marked route from the start, from the map issue point, shows it as a marked route, and it's mandatory to follow that marked route. But how do you actually enforce that? If somebody's disappearing out onto the hillside, how do you know they've actually gone to the start triangle or to the start flag? So, you could do clever things like using marshals, using video cameras, but unless there is no alternative option, i.e. the route from the start is a longer path that's surrounded by forest and there really is no reason to veer off it, it's not very easy to do it. You also get to the situation where a long run out to the start triangle can be confusing to beginners and children who arrive at the start line after running 200 meters and wonder why it hasn't got an SI punch on the top of it. So I would ask people to think when they're setting up the start and the start triangle and how they're going to indicate this on the map, to actually think about where you're going to do map issue, where your start control is going to be. And if necessary, if you really do need people to go to that start point, make it the first control on all the courses. That way you guarantee everybody will go there. And it's being timed because it's not as though the timing doesn't start until you get to the start triangle. The timing starts when you pick your map up. So effectively you're on the course and navigating from then. So yeah, something to think about. And I'm sure there are some people who would disagree with the idea of doing that, but I think the whole idea of planning is to try and plan out problems. So don't do something which may cause questions to be asked or complaints to be made.
I have a couple of comments.
Good.
Not on this section, but just I think from talking about the green courses.
Yeah.
Brian mentioned that he thinks some areas aren't suitable for the very old, but this could be seen as unacceptable for some.
Well, some of the events that, I think the JK in the Lakes did something about that by actually running the old people's courses. Sorry, the veteran courses from a different start. It's perhaps not. It loses some of the atmosphere, but it does mean you can give them a lower level course. And because the older competitors tend to be fairly experienced, you don't need a massive start setup. The start can probably be run by one person. And you can do things like, well, if you've only got a few runners in those categories, then rather than having a 3-hour start window, which is what you have at the JK, run them all in the middle hour. There's not that many people who fall into the sort of older age categories. And I think it's very short green and short green that really you need to worry about. Green courses, I would expect people to just accept what they get. But for the two short and the very short green, then, maybe put it somewhere else and let people almost like run it without all the assistance they necessarily get at the main start. You can have a different start, a different finish, with perhaps just a couple of volunteers manning that. And I think...
Oh, sorry.
Go on, no.
Just another comment from Mr. Hudson, saying that he recently completed a short green whilst recovering from a shoulder injury, which made him realise that the plan of trying the course with a dominant arm and a sling is very enlightening about physical difficulty for older competitors.
Yeah. Yes, it is. It's a bit like the comments, if you're planning junior courses for white and yellow, get on your knees, because that's the view that the competitor will have of the control, not from 6 foot in the air. So yeah, it's kind of difficult to appreciate, I think, how agility in that goes as you get older. So
I'll roll through a couple of others as a little bunch so we can keep.
Yeah, we're running quite nicely on time, so
wonderful. So Ian Cooper's come in with a couple regarding older competitors. When MOW21s plan, they don't understand the physical difficulties faced by older competitors, with some controls being potentially really dangerous.
Yeah.
and with an orange course. Now he has grandkids in the 10 to 14 age group, plus his wife sometimes doing orange. There's quite a lot of variability in the technicality of orange courses. Mentioning a course yesterday at Skipworth Common being very good, although maybe a little long.
Yeah. And that's something that's been raised by a number of people, that some of the orange courses are actually too physical, or technically too difficult rather than too physical. But if you get something that's technically difficult and it's a physical area, then you start to get winning times on the orange course of around 50 minutes to an hour, which you really wouldn't expect. I would hope that a good controller would start to pick up things like that. But yeah, it's a hard one. Planning white and yellow course is a fairly easy to plan, because you stick to paths and tracks and maybe the odd wall or river. Orange is the transition between that and getting into light green, which in most of England is as difficult as we can make it. The areas just don't go beyond that technicality. So yeah, getting the orange one right and not making it too hard is a bit of a skill to be learned. And I'd hope that a controller would help a planner get that course technically correct and of the right length.
And
yeah.
Two final ones popped in. John Embry says also avoid very long / steep climb walk-ins for juniors and oldest vets if possible.
Yeah.
And Brian regarding the orange courses, it's the time of the middle to last competitors that can be a concern.
Yeah, you have to be careful though, looking at individuals. If it's planned right and is the right distance, and somebody is trying to do it that really isn't up to the standard, then it's not the planner's fault if they spend an hour and a half out there. If everybody spends an hour and a half out there, then yes, there's something wrong. If the majority of people are finishing it in the sort of time you'd expect, somewhere between maybe 20 and 40 minutes, and saying, that was really good, and you've then got a few people taking an hour and a half, I would think that you've got people really who have just chosen to do the wrong course.
That's everything from the chat.
Okay, right. So we've covered the start. I shall now move on to the finish. Okay, and this is one where the rules did change, I think, last year, to say that you should really have a single common last control, unless there's something very odd about the event that says this isn't possible. The purpose of this is to make sure that all competitors come into the finish safely and from the same direction. It avoids congestion at the finish. It tends to avoid people hanging around on the wrong side of the finish when you've got people coming in from multiple directions. People have to stand somewhere if they want to congregate. So if everybody comes in from the same direction, then and you have a single last control, that's how you make it a smooth flowing finish. So the rules were changed last year to say the route to the finish from the last control must be taped for the whole route unless the finish funnel is clearly visible to the competitor from their last control. And I've used an example here, which is where there are 4 final controls for 4 different courses. And you can see if you left those as they stand with the finish where it is, you'll get some people coming into the finish sideways, people approaching from both sides. And it's fairly easy to fix just by doing that. Put an extra control in, move the finish another 50 meters down the hill. Everybody ends up going to 199 and then has a run into the finish. I also discovered, and I remember when I had children who were competing, that actually the sprint finish is the one thing where everybody can compare their split times. And we see it in the Compass Sport Cup final, where there's a golden boot for the fastest running. I know that some families, the children quite like to try and outsprint their parents, which doesn't take them very long to be able to achieve that. And so as well as being good for the conduct of the finish, it's actually quite a good thing to do, just to keep some people interested in having a secondary challenge to just being out and completing the course. As far as seeing as tapes are required, I think if you've got something that's as clear as that, where it's just straight down the track, then you probably don't need to tape it. Clearly, if you're running through a forest from a final control, then you do. But it's one of those things where you have to, the planner has to use their judgment as to whether there can be any problems with the competitor finding the finish once they've got to that final control. And it's like a lot of things, it's something very hard to write into the rules and say, clearly we don't require a tape every single way of 100-meter running if it's the only route down the track. It's just unnecessarily work. And particularly if you can see the finish from the final control. Right, so that's the finish dealt with. So hopefully we've done the color-coded courses, we've done the start, we've done the finish. Next thing I want to talk about is uncrossable walls. And this is something where I think that it's the IOF mapping that need to sort themselves out, because we're still in the position where on forest maps, the impassable wall is either impassable or uncrossable, but there's nothing to stop a competitor climbing over it if that's how it's shown on the map. The old definition used to say it's not crossable to the average orienteer. The current definition doesn't say anything, it just says it's impassable or uncrossable, but doesn't say you can't go across it. On sprint mapping, it is quite clear that the impassable wall shall not be crossed, and it says so quite distinctly in the ISS prom definitions, which to me says that the IOF ought to sort out what they want to do with the impassable walls on the forest maps, or we have to start to insist that forest mapping, the planners use the out of bounds boundary, which actually says it's a boundary which is not permitted to cross. And we are beginning to see more of this, I think, in the UK, with walls up in places like the Peak District and the lakes actually being overprinted in red. Once it's overprinted in red, it doesn't matter what it says underneath, whether it's a ruined wall, an impassable wall, or a normal wall, you are not allowed to cross it. And that is absolutely clear in both the sprint and the forest mapping specifications, that if it's marked with a red line, you can only cross it where it's at a marked crossing point. And if we look at that, marked crossing points are a pair of brackets in red. And pardon me, then you start to get into questions about, right, what if you've got multiple crossing points? So you go through in sequence. If there's only one crossing point, then you bend the red lines to the crossing point. If you really want to force people to do it and check they do, probably place a control there. What I don't like to see is red lines over walls, but actually you can get over the wall because it's ruined. It's just that they don't want you climbing on it, and people will be tempted to go the shortest route and just climb through the hole in the wall. So if you have any doubts about people not using the crossing point, then stick a control there. It doesn't change the course, and it guarantees that nobody can cheat. It becomes slightly more complicated where you've got route choice options for crossing a wall or a boundary. Here you have to break the line to show that you can take either of the options. The concern there is that how do you make sure that anybody follows those rules? It's much more difficult, because you'd really want it to be such that for any of those route choices, the competitors won't get an advantage if they don't use a crossing point. And this can be quite hard to plan. So it's something the planners need to think about. I know there was a trial some time ago where planners were putting like controls with identical control codes on 2 crossing points, and you could use either. I haven't seen that done recently, but it did seem to me to be quite a good way of forcing people to go through one or other of the crossing points. It didn't matter which one you went through. They were both shown on the control descriptions as a crossing point, and they both had the same control code. So it didn't matter which one you went through, and you could check at the finish that they'd been through one of them. One of the points I will make is that whether crossing points are mandatory or not, this needs to be unambiguous. It needs to be in the event details, but more importantly, it needs to be indicated on the map. You can't rely on people reading 8 pages of event details or instructions in the start line. They might remember, oh yes, there was something about uncrossable walls, but I can't remember whether it applied to all walls or just ones that are shown on the map in red, or whatever. So make sure that the competitor can tell from the map which walls they're allowed to cross, and if there are crossing points that they have to go through them. Right. Has that raised any questions?
I do have a couple.
Go on then.
So a few comments going down. So Alison said on this, putting a control at crossing point can increase mispunches.
It can increase mispunching. It can also decrease the number of people not using the crossing point. I think you put the control on the near side of the crossing point, so it's fairly obvious. I think the ones that get missed are where you go through a gate and you then expect to look to one side of the gate and see there's a control there. So I would put the control in a very clear position before you go through the crossing point. I think it's less likely to be missed if it's there.
I think,
but yeah, people do fail to punch at crossing points and road crossings. Really no excuse for it other than lack of attention. But try and help them by making that control very obvious.
Echoing that, Brian said that he'd rather the control be before the crossing, even some way before on a good feature, than a marked route to the crossing.
Yeah, if you stick it on a boulder 20 or 30 yards away from the crossing point, that's fine. Because it comes back to this: no competitor will get an advantage by not using a crossing point. If that control is 150 meters away and there's a better route, somebody will take it. If it's only 20 or 30 yards away, then they won't. They'll just head for the crossing point along with everybody else. So that's a good point. You don't actually need to cite the control on the crossing point.
And finally on this, Nick mentioned 50 mispunches at the JK Long due to controls at crossing points.
Probably hidden. So yeah, actually, I think the idea of putting it on a feature whereby there is then no advantage to not using the crossing point is probably a better option, if there's a suitable feature there. So yeah.
And I have a couple of questions about the a comment and a question going about back to the finishes.
Yeah.
So the first one was from Julian saying, if the final control is too close to the finish, competitors may bounce off the finish running against the flow.
Yeah. So you do need to make it a reasonable distance. Yeah, it's no good having it 10 meters away. It needs to be, enough that even if they overshoot, they're not going to get stuck in the finish system.
I will ask this question quickly and then I'll go to the raised hand. Steve has asked, Rule 27.2, needing tape from the last control to the finish, isn't really supported in Purple Pen when planning a score event. Any thoughts on what we should do for score events? Yeah,
I can't remember what we decided. For score events, you can't really force anybody to go to the last control, because I know I've been to events and seen them where the planners had a really good job at, you work out, there's the course, there's the obvious last control for everybody. And then people get to it and realize they've got 10 minutes left. So then dash off to a control straight through the finish almost. So yeah, you can't, it's much harder on a score event. You can try and plan it, but you're never going to make, you can't make a last control compulsory in a score event. It's just, people just won't do it. It doesn't work. So you can try and plan it as well as you can to make that happen, but you just can't enforce it.
And
right,
Nick,
who's got the hand up? Oh, it's Mr. Lightfoot.
It is.
Who hasn't got his mic switched on.
There you go. I'm unmuted. Yeah, just a quick one on the mispunches due to crossing points. I don't think it was anything to do with not being able to see the flag. People just didn't recognise that there was a control at the gate.
Right.
I'm not sure why that is. Possibly there's a lot of purple going on because there's crossing points and walls
Yeah.
and what have you. But I think also just, you're planning to go to the gate and you just don't expect there to be a control there. It just doesn't fit with the planning. But
Yeah.
whatever it was, it's just a shame that 50 people mispunched unnecessarily, particularly in an event where there were lots of there was several examples of as you said, where the line was broken so that you could choose which crossing point to take.
Yeah.
I don't think there was any case where people would either try deliberately to cross the walls. It was just unnecessary. I think just bending the line would have been fine. So I just one other thing is the idea that seeing the kite more visible, again, for colourblind people, just try not to think, oh, the kite's there, you'll see it, because colourblind people don't. And again, I think other people as well. If you're not looking for the kite, you're not necessarily going to see it.
No. So yeah, I do like the idea of having a control, 30, 40 meters short of the crossing point where it becomes the obvious thing to use. It does, though, remove the option of having more than one crossing point as a route choice. And I'm not sure there's any easy way out of that.
Perfect. We have a second, another raised hand from Brian.
Yeah, I think it's also the case that drinks points for elite runners, depending on where the control is. If the drink is before the punch, they'll take a drink and they'll sprint off. And we've had several examples of this in recent elite events. So again, it's the attention factor that Nick is referring to, I think. What are you attending to? Is it the crossing point or the control?
Yeah. In some ways, having a drink station at the control is kind of giving away the location of the control. So I'm not sure why you do that rather than just having the drink stations like I've seen abroad, where it's just on an obvious road crossing for most courses.
Yeah, understand that. Having put out drinks at various events, it's generally easier to put it out of control where everybody will going through. You're not putting in an additional route choice. I take your point, and often everybody will going in a certain way, but often the case is there are route choices.
Yeah.
And the only viable place, effective place for drinks control is actually out of control.
Okay.
Thank you, Brian and Nick. Can I sneak in a couple of other quick ones, Barry?
Yeah.
Somebody else under SB, I'm sorry, I haven't got the full name, also mentioned on the attention point, potentially map exchanges where marshals distract you with pointless chat.
Yeah. I think that we're getting to the stage now with the double-sided maps that map exchanges. I'm not sure I've been to an event recently, in the last couple of years, that we've actually had a map exchange. Most courses now seem to be printed double-sided. I'm not sure about elite courses whether that's done, but certainly for most events now. I was one yesterday where it was a big urban area, and it was really nice because they printed it on both sides, so you didn't have any of these multiple lines crossing over and you couldn't quite figure out which red line you were supposed to be following. I think the advent of printing on both sides actually has made courses a lot easier to read. But yeah, there's, yeah.
And lastly, John's mentioned WMOC had a control hidden behind a drink station. Control description said drinks, but all that had symbol on the map, and this one didn't.
Yeah, I think it certainly requires a bit of thinking, doesn't it, to punch and remember you've got to punch when you're having a drink. So maybe it's back to what people have said, and Brian said, you try and put the control before, even if it's 10, 20 yards away. You can sight the drink station 20 meters away from the control site or from where the banner is, and generally you'll know which direction the elite competitors will be coming in from, or most of the competitors. So try and put it on that side, not actually at the control itself. So it doesn't need to be very far away, but just far enough away that the control site itself is very obvious. And then the drinks are, they can then decide whether they want to go and get a drink or not. Though actually, one of the crossing points things I failed to mention was around the road crossings as well, which is equally where people do miss punch or fail to punch, especially if they're expected to punch on both sides so that the time can be deducted, rather than just having it. We want every competitor to go across the road here, so we'll have one control just before they cross. But it's a fairly low traffic road, so you don't worry too much about having controls either side and taking the splits out. Again, that needs to be clearly shown on the map, and for the road to be indicated that you're not allowed to run along it, that you can only cross at the point shown. Right, is that it? Are we up to date? That's good.
Yeah.
We've got 15 minutes left, which is about right. So on to one of my favourite things. The last few slides are just odd points which have come up over the years. This is actually in the rules now. When you've got an uncrossable feature like a wall, particularly in urban races, it needs to be clear which side of the uncrossable feature the control is located. So you can tell from the map which side of that wall you should be heading for. You don't really want to have a look at the control descriptions and then realize you're actually holding the map upside down because that's the direction you're running in. So which is west? It's not on the left anymore, it's now on the right. And by offsetting the circle slightly, you achieve that. And it's quite interesting that in some of the Scandinavian countries, they would not describe that as a wall corner, but as a piece of tarmac corner. Because that's actually what the control is on. You cannot put the control on top of the wall, so it actually goes on the tarmac. The downside of doing that is that nobody is navigating to a piece of tarmac, you're navigating to the wall. And yet that's the feature you're looking for. So I think what we do here is probably the best thing for the competitor to make life good for them. It's not a challenge about have you read the control descriptions and deciphered them. It's about working out the best route to that control site. So that might raise some questions after I've moved on to the next slide, which is about control descriptions themselves. And this is the slide I've taken from last year's update when we did actually one of the major event updates was on the IOF descriptions because there were some changes. Common things that happen when you look at the control descriptions, things like the climb is missing, the start triangle is missing, descriptions appear in the wrong columns, the control is not on the features stated, and sometimes people just create unnecessarily over complex descriptions. So again, if you're a planner, try and think, what does the competitor actually need to know? If it's a path junction, does he need to know it's on the west side of the path junction, or is it so small that he'll get there and can't fail to see the banner? The one thing that is really important, which personally I find really annoying when it doesn't happen, is that when you've got things like crags and boulders on hillsides, it is really important from both a navigating point of view and from a visibility point of view to know if that boulder or crag is 1 meter high or 3 meters high. If it's a 3 meter high boulder, you're going to see it regardless of the bracken. If it's only 1 meter high and it's some bracken around, the chances are you might not see it unless you get reasonably close to it. So, and the same with crags on hillsides. Spotting a 3 meter crag is relatively easy. Spotting a 1 meter crag is a lot more difficult. So if there's one thing I would ask planners to remember, it's to put the height of those features in the control descriptions. I think I've got what. Go on.
I have some bits for you if you'd like.
I've only got 2 more slides to go, so
I'll sneak in quickly then. On the previous slide, Mr. Lightfoot asked, can you use a purple dot for control location in sprint?
No. But I think the rules are quite clear on that. You don't need a purple dot, and the purple dot actually confuses the picture. If you do the offsetting like that, then why do you need a purple dot in the middle? I can see Nick smiling at the top.
I'll take the smile as a confirmation of a happy response. And then Brian, actually, he's also muted. Brian's mentioned on a hillside, a boulder may need two heights, the higher and lower
Correct.
sides.
Yeah. Yes, if you're going up a hill, then the boulder could be 2 or 3 meters high. If you're coming down, it's almost invisible. So yeah, and that's allowed for in the control descriptions. So again, yes,
that's good.
Doesn't happen very often, but it is something to look out for. Right, I've actually only got one more technical slide. So we threw all the questions on those.
We are
this
indeed, you're good to go.
Yeah, right. This is my favorite slide. Right. These are examples for effect only. Right. So they're 2 maps I generated in a minute on OCAD. First one's a forest with a little tiny knoll in the middle of it. The second is a boulder field with lots of boulders. The planner's out, they're putting the controls out, and his GPS confirms that he's absolutely in the right place, so that's where the control is going to go. However, the competitor doesn't have a GPS, he's only got a map and compass, and I would argue that both of those controls are impossible to find. If all you're using is a map and compass, it becomes a case of pot luck. So just because the GPS says the control's in the right place doesn't make it necessarily a good control. You need to be able to read the route into the control just using a map and compass without using your GPS. If you can't, from the map, tell exactly where you are, then it's not a suitable control site. And I think with the increasing use of GPSs by planners and controllers to make sure the controls are in the right place, that is a really good thing to do because it confirms that they are where they're shown on the map. But the question you then have to ask is, using just the map and a compass, can I actually navigate to them? And if you can't, then it isn't a suitable control site. And I think there's a danger of complacency setting in with, yeah, the GPS says it's right, so it must be right, so I'm going to use it. Competitor doesn't then have a chance. And the final point, which was something that I've seen happen at a couple of events, that the people putting, especially when it's not the planner doing all the control putting out, the people have put the control out and at that point taken the tape or the marker that the planners put out in to avoid it littering the forest. That can actually make life quite difficult for the controller who's expecting to go out and find the control at the point where the tape or the marker was. If the person putting the control out has removed that, the controller has no way of knowing that that control is in the right place and at the point where he checked the tape was. So just a point for planners and people organising control collecting, leave the tape in until the end of the event and then tell the control collectors to make sure they pull the tape in or the marker in when they collect the controls. Right, so that's a brain dump from me. I hope people have found it interesting, useful. We've got 9 minutes left, so I'm happy to take any questions about planning at all, any discussion points, or we can all go off and make ourselves a nice cup of tea.
I'll have to put the cup of tea on delay initially because I have a few leftover ones for you. That's
fine.
I've got one from Ian coming via email. So this was about the multi-level control descriptions. Asking, should column C not be used to indicate upper or lower level, although control descriptions do allow for upper and lower same features?
The control descriptions do allow, the upper and the lower does say on the top or the bottom in the IOF descriptions. However, you need to be very careful with multi-level it's made sprint maps, isn't it? As that it's very clear from the map usually which level the control should be on. I went to an event once where the planner had put two controls in exactly the same place on the map. One was on the feature that was underneath the canopy, and the other was on the feature that was above it. They were both physically in the same place, and guess what? Most people ran to the middle of the circle, found a control and punched it. A lot of people just got disqualified. I think with multi-level events, you need to be very careful about tricking people into going to the wrong level when the map isn't necessarily as clear as it could be. Mapping two-dimensional features on a one-dimensional map is not easy. But yes, you can use the top and the bottom to say, you know, the upper or lower level.
Barry, you have opened an absolute can of worms to this question. It's flying in. So Henry, on the point of the GPS, said that GPS can help to confirm you've got the right feature when you are planning.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I don't disagree with using the GPS, especially if you've got the georeference maps. It's fantastic, but just make sure that it's actually you can get there just using a map and compass. Hence the you know, the examples were for effect only, but you do need to make sure even if the control's in the right place, you can actually get there by reading the map, not just by using your GPS to make sure you're correct.
And then we have plenty of tapes discussion, which I can probably run through and summarise as becoming a discussion. Brian mentioned saying, unfortunately, there could be tapes from either forestry or previous events. He always brings in tapes as SI units are deployed. He's had tapes moved by animals / birds / humans.
Oh, yes.
The controller should check the tapes beforehand.
Yeah.
And then John mentioned, or the controller removes the marker when checking control has been put out correctly.
The reason I think for not doing that is if the control goes missing during the event and you need to send somebody out to replace it, it's useful if the tape or the marker's still there. It's also useful if the control goes missing for a competitor that gets there and finds a tape.
No, totally disagree. Because people find a bit of red tape and they say, oh, I've found the control. And they come back to the finish and they vehemently say to you, you put the control in the wrong place, I found the tape. So it's happened to me on a number of occasions. So that's why I always remove tapes now.
No, if you're in the correct place and there's a tape, if you're in the correct place and there's no control, but there is a tape there, if you're in the correct place, then it helps to confirm.
Unfortunately, maps are not 100%, and people in the spirit, when the heat of the moment, will think they're in the right place. So I'm happy to have a very long discussion about this.
I will carry on telling people when I'm planning or controlling to leave the tape there till the end. So people disagree on these things. There is no hard and fast rule.
Well, one thing I try to do is not use tapes, but use canes instead.
Yeah.
And also I try to use alphanumeric codes if it's a big event in the early stages, because I know we're going to have to renumber towards the end.
Yeah, I don't number the tapes at all.
Okay.
When I'm doing the planning of the courses, I use control codes that we don't actually have SI units for.
That's the way to do it. Yeah.
So I use all 2-digit control codes.
Okay.
Which means I know that I have to replace all of those with the 3-digit code that we've got. And it's also very useful then because you're allocating the control codes once you know where all the controls are going. So you can avoid the problems you get where you get two numbers close together. So you end up with, 68 and 69 on adjacent control sites, which is another way that people often mispunch. If you're allocating the control codes once all the controls are known, you can make sure that the two control codes are quite different.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Although sometimes I find it difficult to judge what people might confuse, like a 3 and an 8 or 3 and a 5.
Yeah. Well, when we ordered our SI units, we went for all 3-digit codes. So we started at 100 or something. And that means you can make both the second and third digits different for controls that are close together. And I try to always do that. Which again, it's like a double check really, that if they're both, if you try and make them both different, it reduces the chance of somebody mispunching.
Yep.
And the other thing I always insist on people doing is you do not use sequences for the white course or the yellow course. because that's where you start to get problems where you do a last minute change because somebody's decided to create an extra track or put a gate or something in, and you suddenly end up with a set of controls where you've either got a number missing or you've got an extra number added in, and it goes like 1, 2, 3, 4, 17, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 101 like that. So right from the start, I like to get completely random control codes and get beginners checking that they've got the right control code.
I think you've touched on a very important point there. Unfortunately, things happen. Trees fall down.
Yeah.
Access permissions are changed, and you suddenly find 10 days before the event, you have to change the course, put in an extra control.
Yeah.
And suddenly you've got a clash of numbers.
Yeah.
So what do you do?
But if you've got random numbers, then there's a fairly good chance that you don't end up.
Yeah. I know.
You've got more chance of avoiding it than if you're using sequences, or if you're using, the old method often people used to use was to say, right, that little group, all the controls in that piece of forest will begin 1, 3 something. So you'd have 1, 3, 1, 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, 3. And that led to more mispunching, I think, than anything else. Now, if you've got 10 controls in a piece of forest and they begin, one begins 1, 1, the next begins 1, 2, the next begins 1, 3, and the final digits are different as well, there's a lot less chance of mispunching.
Thank you. That's
right.
interesting. Well,
I think you've covered off all the other bits on tapes, because I believe that one of them was asking for your thoughts, which I think is well covered.
Yeah.
So to go completely different, Matthew asks, what's the target length for a red course?
I would have thought probably somewhere in the region of 5 to 7 kilometers. So something that's at least as long as a park run. A lot depends on what, how big the area is, but yeah, that sort of distance. So something which a park runner would think was worth doing, a casual runner would think was worth doing, but not 10, 12K, something like that, which is probably too far. So, 5 to 7K, something like that sort of distance.
Andy asks, does the finish have to have a control flag? And if there are 2 finish stakes?
Yes, and yes, it does have to have a control flag. It's normal to have 2, really, just in case one fails. Providing they're synchronized, that's fine. The event I was at yesterday, they had 2, but one would they tried to point everybody at the same the same finish, and the other one was just sort of sitting there with a woolly hat on it, which was there just in case the primary station broke. But there were only like 100 and 150 competitors, so it wasn't a real problem.
I might have an inkling. Ian, you can nod at me if this is correct. Is the raised hand in reference to the email that the last email that you sent me to raise that point?
Yeah, right.
Okay, perfect. So this was on. Now I'll scroll up in the chat to find it before. Sorry, in the email. So this was Ian mentioning the multi-level control descriptions when he said, should column C not be used to indicate? He and you, I believe, said that the IOF rules say that you could. That was correct?
Yeah.
Ian replied saying that the IOF apparently does not say that.
IOF control descriptions. It would be a bit remiss to actually go and find them. I'll stop. No. It is quite in the control descriptions. It does say that it can be used to signify upper or lower. And I will send Ian the extract after the meeting.
I think to potentially save you battle.
Hello,
there he is. Perfect. Excellent.
No, maybe I'm wrong, but the latest control descriptions I have say for column C, you can say upper or lower of the same feature. That does not say upper level or lower level. It says upper or lower of the same feature.
It's not upper or lower. It's top or bottom. If you go and look at if you've got the description,
if you look at column C, it doesn't say top or bottom.
No, top or bottom comes in one of the columns on the right hand end.
On the right hand end.
So it'd be column.
Okay. Well,
probably
G. Either way, planners are not using it, because I've done lots of multi-level events, including lots of Eurocity races.
Yeah.
And very, very infrequently do planners put on upper or lower.
Upper and lower
Very-
is, as you say, is for two features which are the same. So if you've got two crags and they're both within the circle, rather than putting north or south, you can put upper and lower.
that's in column C. But
Yeah.
but often people are confused by is the control on the upper or lower level, because the control descriptions very often do not state that.
No, but that's top or bottom, and I think is in column G.
Right. Well, I think planners need to be aware of that and use it more often than is the case then.
If you'd like to go and look at that after the meeting, Ian, and just drop me an email if that's not the case, but I'm pretty certain it is, because it was one of the things that was asked for when we last did the IOF control description updates.
Column G.
If you're okay with it, Ian, I've got another raised hand, and
I'll ask another question. I'll answer another question while Ian's busy looking at his IOF control descriptions.
Yeah, we have another raised hand. I believe it is Meg.
That's me. I was just getting this upper and lower business, and it's the same thing, that if you can't tell where it is from the paper map, then you can't use it. So if there's two layers in the same place on the map, you can't tell from the map whether that circle is the top level or the bottom level.
Correct.
And so you shouldn't use it at all. You can't go to the control descriptions. It's like it's just totally ambiguous. If you have top or bottom of steps, it gives you a thing, oh, I run up to the top or run down to the bottom, but upper or lower, it could be miles round.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't be using the control descriptions on a sprint map to sort of work out, this is a logic problem.
Multi-level.
Seeing again, I've just looked at that column G. It does say upper, top or bottom, but of the same feature.
Okay.
So if a feature extends over two
steps.
contours, you have to say if it's the top or bottom of that feature. It does not say upper or lower level.
I'll go and have a look at that. I thought that was something that
So
that
needs to be changed by IOF, I think.
Well,
or the fact have upper or lower cliff, where there's two cliffs on the map, and you can say upper to say which one it is.
But
I top of or bottom of, but not
I
two
think
things.
I agree with you on the using controls. If you can't tell from the map if it's at the top or which level it's on, then is it really a suitable control site?
So someone showed me a map from the British Sprint Champs, and it was a sort of two-layer thing where the control was in a corner of a hatched area.
Yeah.
And after 5 minutes, I eventually worked out by logic which layer it was. But that's half the length of time running a course, and that's me thinking with my brain. You just can't do that.
I don't know, but I think at elite level they don't use multiple levels like that. I think it's just not. It's frowned upon simply because of the problems that you've described. There was
some in the British Sprint Champs, and it was an area where there was roadways at the top, and then buildings were at the top level. So it's dark grey with grey hatched.
I've seen the maps. So I think for IOF events,
there was a lot of debate on Facebook. I think it was about this specific control, with lots of different views of how it should be mapped.
Yeah. Right. Any more questions, then, Joe? We could discuss sprint mapping all night. So
I do have another raised hands. Thank you all. Mark?
Yeah, going back to the British sprints, about 4 from the end, I had one on the wall, and I assumed it was on the underneath side. But however, it was on the upper level. So I was told that if there's any doubt, it's always on the upper level.
Why?
The map features are always on the if it's in 3D, the map features are on the top level. But I didn't find this out until after the race.
Unmute it, please. Unmute it.
Put it up. A second, I'll mute everybody and then we can go again.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, there's a lot of. I don't really want to get into mapping of multi-level sprint areas. It's not my you were talking earlier to me, Joe, about can we have another subject, and I think sprint mapping would probably be a good topic, unless I've missed it.
It's It sounds like another one to put in the bank for another longer
Yeah.
feature, and I'll
Yeah.
make sure that everybody who's been involved in the sprint mapping discussion knows when it's happening. I don't think I have any more questions coming in now, but we are looking at a good time here.
Yes.
We've already had a few people peel away.
8 minutes past 8, which is 8 minutes overrun, but it's near enough. So I've finished. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening and for the questions and for some things to think about. I hope some of you have learnt something this evening, which means you'll be able to go away and plan better courses. Or it may just have reinforced your belief that what you were doing was right, and you do plan good courses anyway. So thank you very much for attending. I think Joe's going to at some point put the recording up if anybody wants to watch it again, or watch bits of it again, or point any of their fellow club members to watch it.
Yep, I'll be looking to get that uploaded within this week. A huge thank you to you, Barry, for all the hard work that you put into this, and with such a large audience as well tonight. Really an excellent session. I'm sure everybody will agree. There's many nice messages already in the chat showing their thank you and their thanks and their appreciation. Just as a little plug before we go, as I traditionally do, we do have another session coming up next week, which will be on Tuesday. This is Heat, Health and Orienteering. How hot is too hot? And I know what you're thinking. It is November, so it's not a worry for right now. But obviously, this is going to be, it'll be an important session going forward. And if you won't be able to make it on the night, then there will be the recording up to Cara Ashworth, who is our new chair of the Safety Advisory Group, will be talking through a recent Compass Sport article about hydration and heat stress in orienteering, and explain what she's been doing over at South Downs to assess heat risk in summer competitions. That's my little plug done, but a huge thank you all for attending this evening. Really exceptional numbers, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, everybody.